A state of emergency in Jefferson County where tens of thousands of customers are without power as we go into nighttime hours and colder temperatures. This comes after powerful winds ripped through the area last night. One gust measured 78 miles an hour, that at the Watertown Airport. There are warming centers set up in the region. We'll bring you that information, but first, the latest numbers on outages. Jefferson County still at 23,000 customers without power. That number was around 32,000 last night. Lewis County, 1,300 customers without electricity tonight, and St. Lawrence County, around 7,000 customers without power. National Grid not saying when people can expect their power to come back on. We do expect to learn that information. We just did not get it in time for our broadcast here tonight. And here's what we know about the power situation tonight. A morning call was held with local leaders and National Grid today. We've learned that there is extensive damage to the utility company's distribution system in the city of Watertown. Meanwhile, the state telling us National Grid has 1,500 line, tree, and service workers in the North Country, 800 of them in Jefferson County. And we begin our coverage tonight with Lexi Bruning as people do without power. From one single guy to an entire medical campus that was on generators much of the day today. And we also learn about where people can warm up.
Clean up on Burdick Street in Watertown.
6.5 feet if I'm standing at the base of it.
Picking up the pieces of this fallen tree knocked down by wind gusts that reached nearly 80 miles per hour Tuesday night.
It missed the house by about this much.
In Jefferson County, power lines hung from poles. Tens of thousands are without power. Samaritan Medical Center ran on generators for a majority of Wednesday. Power turned back on at the hospital around 3:30 in the afternoon. Still, it made for a challenging time, and Samaritan's outpatient centers continue to run on generators.
Obviously, we're worried because we want to know what are we up against, generators and fuel and all of those things, and knowing that you don't have everything online, that we had some snafus with some phone systems and some certain equipment that just takes a lot of power.
Tuesday night was a busy one for Jefferson County Emergency Management.
A typical day for us is we usually handle about 225 calls a day, and last night in a 24-hour period we broke over 600.
With the extent of the damage and number of people without power, Jefferson County declared a state of emergency and set up warming centers throughout the county. People can stop by Adams, West Carthage, Theresa, Glen Park, or Sackett's Harbor Fire Departments to warm up or charge their belongings.
Restoration efforts are working on that, but it could be in a significant amount of time here.
Along with the warming centers, Jefferson County and the Red Cross are opening up an overnight shelter here at Jefferson Community College's East Hall.
That will be open for this evening.
Though thousands are still left in the dark, some, like Connell, are just happy to be okay.
It was honestly like a stroke of God or something that prevented that from happening.
Lexi Bruning, 7 News.
And there are some other fire halls in the area being used as warming centers. St. Lawrence County with Herman and Star Lake.
Working, closely with National Grid, we kind of determined that some of the areas are going to have a longer restoration that may not have the power back on tonight.